I thought I'd do a quick Substack live. Hello, Michael Jennings. Hello, Donna. Hello, is it Shibarian? I'm probably not pronouncing that right. Patricia Burney, Bloodwind Tristano, Selena, Jean Pullman, Patrick Burney. Hey, how you going? Emily has now just joined as well. This is fantastic. Thank you for the love hearts. I never know who's actually sending the love hearts because I've only just started doing the the Substack lives. So whoever's sending the love hearts, thank you. I'm not sure who's actually doing it. I thought, who is that? Who's doing the love hearts? I never. Yeah, yeah. Is there a way to know? I guess not. Thank you for that. Whoever it is, I just don't know who it is. So I thought I'd do a quick sort of Substack live today. And I just wanted to discuss what's happening in LA at the moment over there. So I think it's like early morning there. In Australia, it's actually 2:45 p.m. So it's just the afternoon on Sunday. But I wanted to discuss a few things. One of the things I wanted to talk about was what JD Vance tweeted out, and that was basically he said basically this. He basically called it an insurrection. The protests. Insurrectionists carrying foreign flags are attacking immigration enforcement officers, while one half of America's political leadership is evil. This is absolutely insane that they're calling this an insurrection, but absolutely predictable as well. And the reason I think it is predictable is that they want to try to pretend like January 6th didn't happen. It's a big blight on the MAGA movement. Everything that's happened with January 6th, and I'll actually after January 6th, JD Vance called Donald Trump America's Hitler. So you know, so JD Vance called him America's Hitler after January 6th, and now JD Vance is tweeting out that the protesters in LA are insurrectionists. They're going to, and that's what they're using. It's an American thing, code that they can use so they can send in the National Guard, which is insane because you don't need the National Guard for what's going on there. Yet there's a few people who are throwing some stuff and whatever, but this is in terms of protest, the amount of people who are doing that is very, very small. And it certainly doesn't need the National Guard to come in. 2,000 people for the National Guard. That's insane. But it's very predictable because they know that this is the way for them to become more authoritarian. I mean, the people who thought that Donald Trump was not an authoritarian, this is absolutely an authoritarian move. Even if the protesters get more violent, that still doesn't mean, right, there's an excuse to bring in 2,000 National Guard when they have the police and all that to deal with it. But again, this is just another way for Trump and his administration to use the force and test the courts in terms of what they can bring in. And they're doing this on purpose. And I think the fact that they're using the words insurrection, the fact that they're trying to make this out to be similar to what happened in January 6th and using the same language as January 6th is a way for them to sort of get away from the fact that of what happened on January 6th. I think Trump doesn't care. I think he does think the election was stolen. But the other people in the Republican Party, people like JD Vance, I think they are embarrassed about what happened on January 6th. And so they try to use the same language to sort of cover up for that period of time. But nobody here is talking about overthrowing the government, right? Nobody's chanting things like hang Mike Pence or anything like that. Nobody's doing any of this stuff that happened on January 6th. Nobody's attacking the Capitol. These are people protesting ICE members coming into LA and trying to get rid of immigrants that are in that country. And now this is completely different to what happened on January 6th. So for those people to use the same language, it's saying my internet connection is unstable. Can everyone hear me okay? Just maybe some love hearts if you can hear me okay. That'd be great. I think you can. Yep. But yeah, so that's what I think is basically going on. And I think a lot of the stuff that we're actually seeing is just the beginning, right? And this is just the beginning of them testing how far they can push this. because another thing they're going to try to do is obviously they had to bring back Garcia, right? Because the courts decided he had to come back. But they now are basically going to try to use the courts to try to get him sent back out of the country. Comes and goes, but it's good now. Thanks, Paolo. Thank you so much for that. I'm not sure. I've got pretty fast internet, so I'm not sure why that's happening. But I really do think that what we're seeing at the moment. Thank you for the love hearts again. I just don't know who the love hearts is coming from, but again, I just think that things are going to get worse and worse. And what we're sort of seeing now is probably they are hoping that this continues to get worse over time, because that will give them some sort of excuse to sort of, to take this further with the National Guard. All I've seen so far is the CNN, MSNBC really highlight, right, the violence of it. They're really trying to push that this is like a much more violent thing than it is. And they're not pushing back enough on the language being used by Trump in terms of calling it insurrection, 2,000 National Guards. I mean, it's extraordinary that, of course they need to cover the news, and they need to cover the news, objectively. I totally get that. So if there is violence, they need to cover that, right? But at the same time, you can't just be covering, right, and using language like violent protesters all the time when it's obvious that the large majority of them are not violent protesters, and they're there for a valid reason, and they're there because ICE is basically coming in and trying to get rid of, and again, we don't even know what the court's decision on this is. This could be illegal what they're doing, and we don't know that yet because it'll have to go through the courts, all right? And Gavin Newsom has basically came out and said, "There's no need for this," and it's just another way. It's basically propaganda, right? And the other thing is, on January 6th, Trump never called the National Guard on January 6th, right? So he thinks this protest, right, in LA, which has nothing to do with storming the Capitol, right? This deserves the National Guard to get involved, right? But on January 6th, when you had people, going into the Capitol, chanting "Hang Mike Pence," they had a guillotine outside, right? They injured 141 police officers. Trump then pardons those people, right? Calls them patriots, right? Spent 2 months beforehand, before January 6th, telling his MAGA cult, and that's what they are, basically, this is what he kept saying to them for 2 months after the election was stolen. What he says, election stolen. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country. So for 2 months, he told them, Heidi, they need to talk about the violence perpetrated against the people. They're accelerating this to squash the protests. Absolutely, Heidi. Yeah, exactly. They're telling it. It's like everything that I've seen and everything I've read is just coming from one side, and that's the side of the violent protesters or whatever. I haven't seen much about the reason why they're actually there, and there are, because they're there because the people are there to protect immigrants from being taken out of the country, right? They're not there to attack police, ICE people like violently. They're there to help people. They're there to help these people, right? And they're only telling that version of the story, and that's the version of the story that they want to continue going, because that's going to give them cover for bringing in National Guard. If you go over to Fox News, it's even worse. But you expect that with Fox News, right? You expect that. But when you see CNN, MSNBC, and all these people really pushing the whole one side of the story, right? It's actually quite scary, because most of the online media is basically MAGA. And when I mean online media, I mean people like Joe Rogan, and he is media. People like Joe Rogan and podcasters, they have massive audiences, way bigger than CNN or MSNBC or like that. And they're the ones who are going to be pushing that this is like some violent, rioters and stuff like, and this happened with, the BLM riots as well, where, they made it out like, yeah, there was violence to it. Of course, there was violence to it. There was during the BLM. There was also opportunists, but these people weren't necessarily the people stealing shoes during BLM, right? They were like Democrats. They were people. If you're like a 16-year-old stealing shoes during BLM, you're not that political. It's not like, but they made it out like these people, right, were somehow part of the Democratic Party. With January 6th, every single person who was there in January 6th was there simply because Trump told them the election was stolen. That's it. Not opportunists, not some people who thought, I'll just jump in or whatever. Every single one of those people was there because of January, because Trump told them over and over again that the election was stolen. That's not the same with BLM. There was a lot of the stealing and a lot of that stuff were just opportunists, kids, whatever, looking for a way to steal stuff, right? Nothing to do with Democrats at all in terms of that. So there's this constant thing that they try to make the equivalency between BLM and January 6th. They always do that online, the MAGA people. And there is no equivalency. But again, that's what they're doing now. And they're doing that now with the help of not liberal media, when I say CNN, but more like sort of, centrist or, that type of media. And they're really, really, like I was watching CNN before, and they were constantly going out about the violence. They had people there talking about the violence. And it's incredible that they're not actually telling the whole story. And they're not putting enough emphasis on the fact that they're using those stories from CNN, right? They're using that to give cover, right? They don't want to do it on purpose, who knows? But they're doing that to use cover for Donald Trump to go, I'm going to put in 2,000 National Guards. That's insane that you would do that. You obviously don't need 2,000. The Trump administration knows you don't need 2,000. JD Vance knows it's basically theatrics. That's all it is. It's theatrics. They just want to bring them in, and they want to be able to say, we control the violence, but it's also a power grab, right? It's almost like a test run. Okay, let's send the National Guard in for this protest, which doesn't need it. If they feel they can get away with it this time, right, with something like this, the next time it might be something bigger and something bigger. What I'm finding since this Donald Trump, which is the second Donald Trump, is that from 2016 to now, is that this Donald Trump is testing the courts with everything that's going. And I think what they're basically trying to do is they're thinking, how much can we get away with legally, right? And how much are we going to have to start ignoring? So they're doing that with the courts, right? They're trying to work out how far they can push it, right? And I think the same thing with the National Guard. This is just a test run. We're going to see in a couple of months, I'm sure of it, they're going to test it even further, right? They're going to use the national, because if they get away with this, if nothing happens to the Republican Party and they don't get enough pushback for using the National Guard, we're just going to see it continue to get worse and worse. This is like a test for them to do it. And I think eventually, right, they will use it for other reasons. And I think possibly even for the midterms and things like that, where they might try to make up stuff, not false flags. I don't believe in any of that stuff, but, make up stuff like anytime there's like a protest or anything like that. Because if you start sending in the National Guard every time there's a protest, right, you're going to stop peaceful protests all over the country. Because at the end of the day, if you're like a protester and now you're thinking, well, I don't want to go against the National Guard, right? I don't want to go out there and risk my life because of the National Guard, because the National Guard is not trained, right? This isn't their job. Their job is not to look after, is not to sort of quell protests. That's not what they do. That's not what their main goal is. Police officers, tactical units, that's what they're trained for. So if you have the National Guard doing this, right, there's chances that the National Guard will overreact to situations because they're not trained in this area and use force that wasn't necessary. Much more so than police who are trained to do these type of things. So why would you send in people who are not trained for protests, who are not trained to do this type of stuff? All you're going to do is you're going to create, right, a situation that's, that even if it gets a little bit out of hand, they're going to make it 100 times worse by including them, because now you're just including the military. in a protest. Like, why would you include the military? If you're going to include the military in your protest here, why wouldn't you do it on January 6th, right? On January 6th, they literally had a guillotine. MAGA voters had a guillotine at the front while the people who went in, broke in, right, and were chanting, hang Mike Pence. But they didn't bring in the National Guard for that at all, right? They had politicians running out the building, right, on both sides. And you had 141 police officers who were injured. And the person who started that, Trump, right, because, their little peanut brains got, peanut brains, maybe not peanut, walnut brains. Their little walnut brains got brainwashed, right? And they got brainwashed over a couple of months to believe his lies. And those little peanut brains and walnut brains couldn't handle the constant lies of Donald Trump. It was stolen, all that stuff. They were no defense. They were no defense because little brains are tiny little brains. And, and that's just the way it is. It's always, and that makes me think that even with all this stuff with Elon Musk that we're seeing at the moment, Elon Musk and sort of Donald Trump having this like massive fight over, over all this stuff, and Elon saying that he's with Epstein and all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, I think Elon Musk was basically used, and I'm not saying like I feel sorry for Elon. I'm no fan of Elon Musk, but I think he was in a sense used, but by Trump to give him cover, right? That he was basically going to cut, the budget and all stuff to what Donald Trump wanted to do. But Donald Trump didn't want to cut the budget in areas where it would make a massive impact. But he did cut the budget in areas where the most needy needed it. The psychopathic thing about Elon, and it was quite interesting, is he was interviewed like a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, and he said, I don't understand why people hate me. It's not like I've hurt anybody, right? So in Africa, right, they cut US aid in Africa. And it's already been detailed there that thousands of people have died, right, because of his cuts to USA. Thousands of people have died. More people in America itself are not going to be able to get Medicaid, food stamps, all those sort of things that they were getting before. And they're using the lie of, no. We're only going to cut it for people who are able-bodied. This is just complete BS. Everyone knows it. And I don't think they're going to get away with it, because I've said this before, is that I think Donald Trump is very good at being the opposition leader. So he's very good at fighting against the incumbent government, like he was against Hillary, when it was the Democrats, the incumbency, and also against Joe Biden, because he's very good at negativity. He's not very good at positivity. It's all about negative. Make America great again. Okay, couple of questions. When does he think America was great? All right. And when does he think it stopped becoming great? Because that would be good to know, because he doesn't really tell people when he thinks it was really great. And if he goes back to the 50s and says it's the 50s, well, there's probably a lot of minority groups and black groups who probably don't think that time was great, women, that sort of stuff. So he's not, it's very broad what he's saying, make America great again. But in a sense, he's basically, it's all about going against the incumbent government. And that's his problem when he governs. That's why he got kicked out in 2020, because COVID brought out all the insanity of Donald Trump. And what Donald Trump is good at is when he's fighting against someone who's in power, like Joe Biden, he puts all the stupidity onto that person. So he'll focus it on Biden or Kamala and stuff like that. But you can't do that when you're the incumbent government. He can't have a go at Biden now. I mean, he can, but he's not in power. So the average American, and this is probably true, not true for you guys, the Americans watching, but true in all Western cultures, that since COVID, less and less people watch media, like normal media. In fact, they tune out from politics mostly. Most people do. And because there's so many things that people can watch these days, TikTok, streaming services, all these sort of things, So a lot of people in America and other Western countries, even like my country, similar in Australia, not to the same degree, but similar, they're only watching politics on the peripherals, right? And so if you do that, then you blame the incumbent government, right? And the incumbent government at the moment is Donald Trump's government. So if you're suffering, if you're a working class person and you can't afford to pay for things and rent's too expensive and you're a young person who can't buck it, and you're not following politics, right? Then you're going to blame the person who's in power. And at the moment, that's Donald Trump. And I think that's why the midterms are going to be a bloodbath, right? I think, unfortunately, this is actually the truth. And I think 2024 proved it, is that there's not enough people in America who are following politics enough, right, to look at all the court cases he was involved in, like the January 6th, the insurrection, things like that. They weren't following that stuff, right? They were just seeing on the peripherals that Donald Trump was showing up in court every day. And Donald Trump was saying it's a witch hunt, right? So he managed to convince all these people who weren't following politics very closely that, or just a little bit here and there, is, well, look, hey guys, I'm in court every day. These people are coming after me with all these indictments and stuff like that, right? It's a witch hunt. They don't want me to run. Just let me run and see who wins. And they managed to convince a lot of people, right? Low educated voters I don't mean low educated in terms of like degrees and stuff, but in terms of how in touch they are with politics. And there's way too much of that at the moment. And that's a big problem. So the poll and what a New York Times thing showed months later, right, is that basically people who vote for Republicans or Donald Trump in 2024 were less likely, right, to follow politics on a regular basis. They were less engaged with politics. So those people voted more for Trump. The people who voted for Kamala were people who were mostly engaged with politics, like people like us here, right? And I think, and that makes sense. That makes perfect sense, because if you followed politics closely and you saw Donald Trump in 2024, that would be, in a way, even more concerning, right? That would be even more scary, that you were following the politics and you still voted for Donald Trump. It kind of gives me a little bit of hope, right? A little bit of hope that part of the reason why Donald Trump won was not because people didn't care about what he was doing, or maybe there was probably some of that as well, but they were too focused on their own lives. They weren't engaged with everyday politics. And those people just voted for whatever they thought that Donald Trump was going to say, like things like, saying that he was for the working class person. He lied a lot. And a lot of people, unfortunately, buy his lies. I think there's also other people who maybe not sure if they believe him, but they think, well, at least, they had nostalgia as well. They thought that, when he came in 2016, the economy was good. The economy was okay back then, but it was okay because Barack Obama made it okay. Barack Obama came in during the GFC crisis, right? So he came in like 2 months after that, and the economy collapsed. And then he had to bring it back, and he made it into a good economy back in like 2007. So Donald Trump inherited a good economy, and he got the credit for it. It's insane. Like the way they market things to make it out like he did this. In 2024, when COVID came, the economy crashed, right? But they don't blame him for that. They will blame him. They will say, no, well, that's not his fault. That was COVID, right? Okay, well, if you're going to give him credits for that, okay, if you're going to give him credit, if you're going to say, well, it wasn't his fault, it was COVID, then give Barack Obama credit for the economy that he inherited. And then it gets even crazier, because post-COVID inflation, which affected every country on the planet, including my country, Australia, Europe, all the other Western countries, right, wasn't because of Biden. It was because of, you had all these places that were locked down, and suddenly, boom, they all came out and they had extra money because they hadn't done anything for a couple of years. And in China, they were locking down all the factories, even if there was one case. So it made everything go expensive. So you've got everything locked down, and something, boom, all come out at the same time. Of course, there's going to be inflation. So that's what happened. But instead, the Trump administration, MAGA, were successful in pinning that onto Trump. The problem with America, and this is not a criticism to all the people listening, but is I've always found Americans, not that you guys are amazing. I mean, just the MAGA Americans, right, is that they a little bit insular. They don't look at what's happening around the world. right? And if you don't look around the world, you can blame the person who's in power in America at the time, Biden. But if they looked around the world, they would have gone, wait a second, this inflation is affecting Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, England, all these other countries. So it, are they blaming Biden for inflation in London or Sydney, Australia, or any other place? Of course not, right? So it was because of COVID. It wasn't of because of what Biden did. So, but he got the blame for 4 years, and then it gets even worse. The country that brought inflation down the most out of all the Western countries was America. So Joe Biden brought inflation down the most by a massive degree. It was way big in Australia. It was way big in Europe. But he got the blame for all the inflation, and he got and he got none of the credit for bringing it down. And Trump, this is amazing. Trump got all the credit for the economy he inherited from Obama, and got very little of the blame for what happened during COVID and the economy crashing. I think there's like $13 million loss. This is it's as an Australian who looks at politics, right? Who's very obsessed with American politics, maybe too much. But, I am, because I find Australian politics more boring, which I like, which I think is a good thing. But yeah, it's definitely insane for me to watch this happen where somehow Trump convinced so many people. And I think if you look at how he won the election, where he won it, obviously the Electoral College helped him. He did win the popular vote, so there's that, but he did lose that in 2016. But I think if you look at the swing states where he won mostly with working class people, yep, and younger people. He picked up more of the younger people that usually vote left, right? And he did that by going on shows like Joe Rogan, a lot of these podcasts and stuff like that. Who I think his son Barron, who's like 19, he watches that and he got him to go on it. So he appealed to the right people, working class people and things like that. And because a lot of working class people, not all, but some working class people in those mid states, middle states up there in the grass bit, they're more conservative. They're more not so much economically conservative, but they're more culturally conservative. And Trump ran on a platform of anti-woke, and that he did that ad that a lot of people say was quite successful, right? Where it was against trans people, where he said, and the ad basically says at the end, it says, Democrats are for they, them, and we are for you. It was actually a very effective ad, but not because it was anti-trans, because they tied it to the economy, right? So what they did is they basically said, Democrats are so focused on woke, right? They don't care about the price of eggs, rent, house prices, right? And really, elections always do come down to the economy, mostly, right? And so they managed to paint Democrats as being obsessed with woke, and then they basically said, "We're obsessed with you. We're gonna bring rents down." And he just lied all the time. In 24 hours, we're gonna get rid of inflation. He just kept saying all this stuff, right? Prices and stuff like that. But he got away with it, and he got away with it because the people that voted for him in those middle states, conservatives, they didn't like the whole woke thing, trans thing. Again, this is insane, right? And this is what's so maddening for someone from Australia who's watching this, because I'm seeing the whole picture, not just, what the MAGA people are saying, is that the Democrats didn't run on woke in 2024. In fact, they ran away from woke. They ran away so far from woke, they ended up with like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney at some stage. And you had like Tim Walz putting on his camping hat, and Kamala was talking about, how she's got a Glock gun. Anyone comes to my house, I'm going to they were trying to stay away from woke. And so the way they tried to pin them down, that is insane. And again, how is it possible that MAGA could not see that the Democrats were not running on anything woke, right? But yet they still got blamed for it. So this is, again, an insanity thing that I see all the time on that side. And it's very hard to watch from my side. I think, am I cutting out? Can anyone say, am I cutting out a lot? Because it feels like I'm cutting out here, but I don't know if that's happening from your side. Love hearts if everything's okay. Any love hearts? No? Okay. It's okay. Everyone can hear me? Yep, cool. All right. Excellent. Yeah. So basically, I do think that a lot of this stuff that we're seeing, the Fox echo chamber has huge influence. Yeah, Heidi, you're 100% right. It does. It has a massive influence. No problem, Paolo. Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, the Fox echo chamber is a massive problem. Now, I will say it's not as big a problem as people think it is. It's a bigger problem amongst older people. The average demographic of people who watch Fox is in their 70s, but they also do post their stuff on YouTube. And that's where it picks up a lot of the younger people. So young people aren't watching Fox News cable. They're watching the clips they see online. That gets clipped onto MAGA influencers on Twitter and things like that, and that's where they watch it. So even though Fox will say, well, our demographics are 70s, that only talks about the people watching cable live. It's not talking about where it's been retweeted or posted or shown somewhere else. So it is actually a bigger problem than people think it is, because it does cross different channels. And I think also they also have the online world. They really do have the online world. If you look online, even on Substack, some of the biggest accounts on Substack are actually either MAGA people or MAGA sort of sympathetic people. And you get that as well online. You've got Joe Rogan, you've got all those around here. There's all these comedians, right? And they're all like friends with Joe Rogan, the LA comedy scene. And they basically were or endorse Donald Trump. They're sympathetic to Donald Trump. And those people get massive views. I mean, compare that to CNN. And then on the other side, you got MSNBC, CNN, which is nothing like Fox News, not even close. I mean, you know, CNN will spend all day talking about Joe Biden's decline, right? But they won't spend all day talking about that Donald Trump, and he did this, like, you probably heard this, but Donald Trump, not that long ago, reposted that on his Truth Social, that Joe Biden was assassinated in 2020 and was replaced by a robot clone. Yeah. So the president of your country, not mine, I'm not taking, although, so the president of the United States reposted, right, that Joe Biden died in 2024 and was replaced by a robot clone. And then I churned on CNN and there was Jake Tapper talking about his book about how Joe Biden declined. I don't understand. It's very hard for Democrats to win this media world war, I think, because they got all these young people online who are very much with them. And then Fox News has a much bigger audience than CNN and MSNBC. And also CNN, they worry a lot more about bias, as where Fox News doesn't care about bias. They don't care at all about it. And on top of that, you've got Newsmax, you've got OAN, you've got all these other channels where they're getting stuff from. They do infiltrate. You've got Tucker Carlson, who has this extraordinarily large audience online, right? He got kicked out of Fox News, right? He was caught at Fox News. This is hilarious. He was caught at Fox News after, the whole Trump, Fox News was trying to go along with the whole election, was stolen right after the election when Trump was saying the election was stolen. And Fox News played along with that for a while. All right. And even, Tucker Carlson was like giving Sidney Powell a bit of airtime. Okay, that's interesting. So you're saying that there was these Venezuelan communists who hacked the Dominion forces. Okay, that's interesting. So she was like this crazy person who was saying all this stuff. Anyway, eventually Dominion, who was the people, the machines, the Dominion machines where people were voting, they weren't happy about talking about, that they were hacked by Venezuelan communists. So basically they sued and successfully sued Fox News. But before they came to an agreement, during discovery, which is the bit before it goes to court, they were Dominion lawyers were able to get secret text messages from Fox News people, their producers, and people like Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity. So they got all these text messages, right? So we were able to see what was happening in real time at Fox News when the whole stolen election thing was happening right after the election. And what we found out was incredible. We found out that Tucker Carlson really didn't believe privately that the election was stolen. In fact, he thought Sidney Powell was crazy. He thought that Sidney Powell was a nutcase. But if you watched him online when he interviewed her, he never said that. he said, he gave her a voice and all that stuff. And that was the same with Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, and all those people, right? So these people were going along with the Stop the Steal thing, even though privately they were text messaging the opposite. Tucker Carlson text messaged, right, his producer that he was worried that a real journalist, like this is a straight female journalist at Fox News, she was telling the truth. She was saying, we haven't found any evidence of Dominion swapping votes, that sort of stuff. We haven't found any. This is what a straight news journalist at Fox News was saying publicly. And so what happened is when the straight news journalists started saying that, the MAGA cult, the people who watched him, because they want just Fox News to tell them what they want to hear, right? Because it's a cult. And so the MAGA cult basically got angry at Fox News and said, "What are you doing? Like, why are you saying there's no there when it comes to the stolen election?" And so they all started, a lot of them, millions of them, started going to Newsmax, the alternative, right? Now, Newsmax back then was quite small, but because Fox was getting cease and desist letters, from Dominion lawyers, they started pulling back. And as soon as they did that, they were losing their audience to Fox. So Tucker was getting worried about this. So Tucker sends a private text message to his producer, and he says about the Fox News journalist who's telling the truth, somebody stop her. Somebody fire her, right? Have you seen the Fox stock prices? So what happened is when everyone started going to Newsmax, right, the Fox stock prices started tanking, right? And of course, Tucker would have Fox stock prices because he's working there, and he was worried about that. So the person, now remember this, MAGA think Tucker Carlson is the truth teller. The person, they looked at him as the only genuine journalist, right? The guy who got caught, like we're not guessing this. We know this for a fact. The guy who got caught saying one thing publicly on TV and privately the opposite, who wanted to fire a journalist for telling the truth, that he actually agreed with the journalist, right? Was worried about his stock prices. And that's the person this encapsulates to me the whole MAGA peanut brain, the walnut brain. I think what's smaller, peanut or walnut? I think a walnut's smaller than a peanut. But so let's go with walnut. The walnut brains think that the hero of journalism is Tucker Carlson, right? It just seems like the more you lie in the MAGA movement, the more they like you. Trump lies all the time and they love it. Tucker Carlson lies all the time and they love it, right? They just, and they all just lie. So it's just incredible that the MAGA don't seem to be able to process things like all that stuff about Tucker Carlson lying. That was all in the newspapers. It wasn't on Fox News, strangely enough, curiously enough, it wasn't on Fox News. It wasn't on Newsmax, it wasn't on OAN. So a lot of times, they will say that liberals live in an echo chamber, but the amount of people I've spoken to on Twitter, like MAGA people on Twitter and things like that, who, when I mentioned the Dominion lawsuit, they've never heard of it. Like they know something about it, like they had to pay out some money or something, but they don't know about that Tucker Carlson was tweeting something privately. They have no idea. Something that was pretty much in all mainstream newspapers except for MAGA media, and they have no idea about it. And this is the problem. When you have people living in these echo chambers, right, and they're not getting any other information, they will then look at someone like Tucker Carlson and they think he's a truth teller because they actually don't know any about that. So when I go on Twitter, I will send them information about the lawsuit, right? I'll say, look, this is what Tucker said privately, he was saying something publicly, and then they don't fight against that because it's obviously true. And I'll say, well, they're all like that. And I'm like, okay, if your argument is that all journalists are like that, then why would you look at Tucker Carlson as a hero, right? You would just go, Tucker Carlson is as bad as the other ones. But they don't do that. They look at Tucker Carlson as the truth teller. That's what they say. He's a truth teller. And I'll say that. I'll say, what makes him a truth teller even though he's lying? And they're like, well, he's not mainstream media. And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. He's online. He was at Fox News when he was doing that. Now he's online. He's even worse, right? Now he's purely online. He will just tell the most ridiculous stories, things like that you would hear in the National Enquirer, right? Like tabloid stuff. One of the first things he did when he went online, when he specifically, after he got like sacked, fired from Fox News, was he said, because he knows the thing about Tucker is he knows his audience. When he's on Fox News, he knows who was watching him. So he was captured. He's captured by his audience. It's called audience capture. And basically, he told Fox News audience what they want to hear. Now he's online. It's a different demographic. He has to tell them what they want to hear. And the people online are a little bit different. They're more conspiratorial. So they want to hear things like, you know what? They want ivermectin. They want to hear that ivermectin cures everything, right? And so, Heidi, they listen to people who say what they want to hear. It validates their point of view. That's right, Heidi. Exactly. Audience capture. Audience capture is a massive problem. It's a problem in mainstream media, but it's more of a problem online as well. Because online, right, if you're someone online and you've built an audience, and then you think, and then your livelihood, you get paid by that audience, right? They're paying you a monthly subscription or whatever, right? And then suddenly something happens and you disagree with it. And it might go against your own party, whatever it is, right? And if you do that, you could lose all your audience, right? And then suddenly your livelihood's gone. So they have to constantly be thinking about, is this going to annoy my audience? Now, you should be able to annoy your audience, right? Obviously, if you're a liberal and come out and you say I'm MAGA, of course you're going to lose your audience, right? But, you don't have to agree 100% of the time with everything, no, right? So you should, but some people in the online world do get scared. They do get scared with that stuff like that. And Tucker Carlson knew that. And the first thing he did, he said, I'm going to talk about ivermectin. I'm going to talk about aliens, and I'm going to talk about the deep state. All the things that MAGA online love to talk about. Aliens, ivermectin. Ivermectin cures everything for them. Everything cures ivermectin. I've seen people on Twitter who will talk about ivermectin curing things like STIs, right? Curing things like headaches, back pain. They just think it's the thing that does everything, right? And Tucker will give voices to that, to anybody who says that. He had one of the first people he had on was Larry Sinclair. You might not know who he is, but he was years ago, decades ago. He was interviewed on the National Enquirer, which is like it's like a tabloid newspaper that just does stories like, and I used to like front page stories like, Elvis Presley was found packing groceries at a local shopping center, a Costco or somewhere like that. Like this was like 10 years ago. And that was like the front page news. Or it would have a woman who's pregnant and it would say, I was impregnated by an alien, right? So that's the kind of stories that National Enquirer wrote. So the only person who would take this guy called Larry Sinclair seriously, and Larry Sinclair is a guy, right, who's a meth addict for years. And not only that, but he's been convicted of fraud like 6 or 7 times, like white collar crimes, lying. He's been in jail on and off for a long time. And the National Enquirer took his story seriously that he spent a night with Barack Obama, right? So nobody else touched that, right? Not because they were scared of Barack Obama, because they knew there was no evidence. He has zero evidence that he's ever met him. It's basically the amount of evidence he has is if someone just walked into New York Times and said, I was in a relationship with Donald Trump. Okay, can you show us some texts, anything like that? Any evidence? Do you have any photos or text messages or email? No, nothing. We can't take that as a story. Okay, that's literally the amount of evidence that Larry Sinclair had. On top of that, he was like a convicted fraudster. But Tucker Carlson, one of the first person he invites onto his new online show is Larry Sinclair. And he gives Larry Sinclair this whole platform without fighting back at all that he had a relationship with Barack Obama. Basically, this is the guy that MAGA call a real journalist, a real truth teller. Nothing encapsulates this group more than that's the person, someone who does tabloid journalism or does complete lies, right, on a regular basis, right, constantly lying about everything. And he gets away with it. Now that he's online, he doesn't have to worry about Fox News producers saying, look, you can't say that, we might get sued. He doesn't have to worry about, Rupert Murdoch, the ex-Aussie who, now owns Fox News and a couple of other places over there as well. We're glad that Rupert Murdoch left Australia. Although Rupert Murdoch, the ex-Aussie who owns Fox News and all that, he actually still owns a lot of newspapers in Australia. Yeah, but most people don't read newspapers these days. They're online as well. But yeah, he still has a little bit of power in Australia. But so yeah, that's basically those people basically there is it just, to me, it doesn't matter. Like, for some reason, MAGA are obsessed with being a contrarian, right? If they hear, right, 700 doctors say, like, if they went, say, oh, this mole, right, on my arm is cancerous, you should cut that out. And then you had someone else come up and say, don't believe mainstream scientists. They just want to make money off you. I don't think it's cancer. Have you tried ivermectin? You haven't? Okay. Give that a go and see how. I think you'll find that you won't need to cut that little mole. That's how they think. Although it's saying that, that's how they act online. I think in real life, if someone said, if they thought they were having a heart attack and there was a mainstream doctor and that mainstream doctor said, you need to take a COVID vaccine, otherwise, they'd probably take it, but, it's just that online, they want to be contrarian. That, it's like it comes from a lot of this stuff comes from COVID, where people were in lockdown and people like Joe Rogan, not just Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, all this massive media who have massive bodies, convinced a lot of America that all mainstream politicians and mainstream doctors and scientists got everything wrong about COVID. They were wrong about the vaccines. They were wrong about masks. They were wrong about everything, literally everything they think. And Joe Rogan was right about everything. That's the comparison they give. And that's really rampant out there in the MAGA movement. And it's insane. And I feel that's what gives people like Tucker Carlson cover. And this is the reason why this helped Donald Trump get elected, right? Because even though this is kind of contradictory, the COVID vaccines were made under Donald Trump. Operation Warp Speed was made under Donald Trump. But Donald Trump has taken credit for them occasionally, but it's like on a rare occasion. Like, he doesn't do it all the time. And the reason he doesn't do that all the time is because he knows his base hates the vaccine, right? But at the same time, it did happen under him. So he doesn't talk about it very much. But he has a couple of times. He said a couple of times he was interviewed, he said, I don't get enough credit for him. But then he won't talk about it again. So there's a big contradiction there for the MAGA movement. The MAGA movement is literally nothing they hate more than the COVID vaccines. So they don't want Trump to take credit for it. So they blame it on Fauci. Whenever there's something they don't like, this is why it's such a cult. Whenever there's something that the MAGA movement don't like that happened under Trump, they will find someone else to blame, right? It's Fauci's fault. Or with the Epstein files, right? The Epstein files aren't being released, right? Everyone expecting the Epstein files, right? So instead of blaming the fact that Trump had a really close relationship with Epstein for a long time, and basically said once, that Epstein's a terrific guy and happens to like women on the younger side. Yeah, all this stuff, right? And so there's all this close relationship between them. But they will, so they don't go to the most obvious thing, which is the most rational thing, which is maybe Trump doesn't want the files to be released because he's in there somewhere, right? I don't know what it says, but he's in there somewhere. And so they don't go there. They go to, it's Pam Bondi's fault. It's someone else's fault in the administration, right? It's the deep state's fault, right? They will find everyone else to blame for that. In January 6th, instead of blaming the person who was like telling these people that if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country, right? You kept saying that up to 2 months before January 6th, right? And then called them patriots afterwards, right? They don't blame him for January 6th. They blame Nancy Pelosi. Again, if you look at all these things in a row, it's just like, how is it possible that these people can actually exist in normal day society, right? How could they even know how to vote? Like, it's astonishing that you can have all these things that go on, and they will just find all these other people to blame for something they don't like. And this is the problem with this group is if Donald Trump doesn't run for a third term, we don't know if he will. I wouldn't surprise me if he tries, to be honest. But let's say he doesn't, right? If he doesn't run, I think he's going to pick someone who's as close to him as possible, and he's going to run with that person. So he's going to show up at every single rally with that person. It's almost like it's going to be Donald Trump running, but he'll be like the de facto guy, right? And he will try to take control vicariously through someone else, right? So that person, right, will have to try to bring in the MAGA cult, right? Because if it's not that person, if for some reason we get to the midterms and Trump becomes even more unpopular than he is now, right? There's a chance that another lane might open up, an anti-Trump lane might open up, right? Who knows what happens between now and then, how authoritarian America gets. Maybe it's not possible to do that back then. But let's say it is. Those people are going to find it hard to get the MAGA cult behind them because there's no one else in the MAGA leadership who they think who can just say stuff like that and then they believe it. The only other person who comes close is Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is the only other person because he's the only other person in the MAGA movement who does stupid stuff all the time, like says things like, gets caught out lying on Fox News, constantly get lying all the time, making up stuff, listening to people like Larry Sinclair about he was in a gay relationship with Trump, all these stuff that he lies all the time and stuff like that, blames Russia for the war, with Ukraine. One of the funniest things, as a side thing, one of the funniest things I ever saw, I don't know if you saw that video where Tucker, a couple of months, it was like 6 months ago, so where Tucker Carlson went to Russia, and it was like this big propaganda tour that he did there, right? And eventually, and then during that propaganda tour, he interviewed Putin, right? Which was funny itself. But what was even more funny was the part of the propaganda tour is he did a video of a shopping village in Moscow somewhere. And so he goes in there, this shopping center, right? And he's walking around with a shopping trolley, a Russian shopping trolley, and he's going, "This is amazing. Have you seen this before?" And he goes up an escalator, and the wheels lock in, so he doesn't have to touch the shopping trolley. And he's going, and he's like, just a mate, and he even says, "This is like radicalizing me," And then he goes, and then he looks at the camera, and they're going up the escalator, going up, and he goes, "Mum, look, no hands," and he takes his hands off, and the shopping trolley stays because it's locked in. Now, two things could be going on here, right? One is he's doing this ridiculous propaganda thing. Two could be that Tucker Carlson hasn't done shopping in a very long time, right? Someone else is doing his shopping for him. Because if you go to an Aldi in America, other places as well, all around the world, shopping trolleys that its wheels lock in when they go up an escalator is not that uncommon. But for Tucker Carlson, it was one of the most surprising things that's ever happened to him. It was incredible. I couldn't believe it. Then he goes into the shopping center and he talks about the price of everything. Now, just so people know, the shopping center that he went into Russia was not just your average shopping center. It was an upmarket shopping center. So it wasn't as crowded, right? So that's something he doesn't tell you as well. And then he buys, and then he goes up and he checks the bread and he smells the bread and he goes, "Oh, this is just amazing." It's like he's attracted to the bread. He was that moved by the bread. It was incredible. And then he starts talking about how much he spent for that. Like he bought a whole bunch of shopping stuff and how much he spent. And he's talking about how it only cost him. Thank you for the love hearts. I have no idea who does the love hearts. Is that you, Meg? Okay. And then basically, And so he's looking at all these. He's looking at all the stuff, and he's got, it only cost me a couple $100, or like $100. I can't remember what it was, but it was a low amount, right, for the whole week. Hi, Meg. How you going? And basically, he's looking at it and he goes, "I can't believe this. In America, this would cost this much." It was like double or three times the amount, right? Now, what he doesn't tell the audience, now, I'm sure this has to be for a MAGA audience because liberals in America would have seen right through this, is that the average salary in America would have been basically a person's salary that that amount of groceries he bought would have been half their salary, more than half their salary, right? So he's looking at the price of food in a developing country like Russia, which is not a first world country, which has a lot of economic problems, right? If you go to a third world country, in Australia, a lot of people go to like Thailand or places like that, which is like a developing country, it's close by, and people go there for holidays, or Bali, which is part of Indonesia, right? And they go there because it's cheap and it's nice beaches and everything, right? It's cheap because it's a developing country. Everything's cheap there. So for Tucker Carlson to go to Russia and then go on about how amazing the prices are for the food, that's because the reason for that is because people's salaries there are so bad. People make bad money, right? Unless, you're like Tucker and you're using American money, which people in Russia obviously aren't using. They're using their own money, rubles. So this is, again, and every single time I just think, I'm thinking about, when I'm watching that, I'm trying to put myself in an American who's watching that. And I'm thinking, are they thinking what I'm thinking? I'm not thinking that shopping trolley is nothing special, right? And am I thinking, is his mum really that impressed by it when he said, "Look, mum, no hands"? I mean, I don't know. Like, his mum is super rich. I know that. So maybe she hasn't been shopping as well for a very long, maybe never. And therefore, to them, that wheel's locking in on the. I mean, can I ask just anyone who's watching this now, like, have you ever been to a shopping center, if you're living in America, where the wheels lock in when they go up an escalator? Just say yes or no if you've ever seen that, because as far as I know, they're not that uncommon in America. But we'll see. Yeah, but yeah, I just think like the whole thing is just insane, and I put myself in the head, right, of the person who's watching that, and I'm thinking to myself, how is it possible that they're believing this? And then I think, well, the people that he's saying this to is not saying it's a liberals. He's not saying it's independents. He's talking to the MAGA base, right? Those type of people, or people who are sympathetic to the MAGA base or to Trump, right? And so the fact that he thinks he can get away with these obvious lies shows to me that basically people like Trump and people like Tucker have contempt for their own audience and their own voters. Nobody hates, right? Nobody hates Trump supporters. Paolo, I first saw that kind of escalator in North California in 1990s. I know. I was thinking, yeah, I mean, they've been around for a lot. Those elevators, I mean, this was like filmed a couple of months ago. Like, those shopping trolleys have been around for like years. Anyway, it's just crazy. I know. But again, yeah, it's just insane. And I just think they have so much contempt. I wrote this article on my Substack newsletter, and I basically said nobody hates MAGA more than Trump. And I mean that. I really mean that. I don't think Trump likes the people who vote for it. A lot of the people, not all, but a lot of people. Can you imagine Trump ever socializing with working class people? He's never. He's a socialite from New York who partied with. Yeah, Paula. It's like Bush 41 and the grocery scanner. I remember that. Yeah, exactly. I remember that, Paula. Yeah, it's crazy. Like these. Yeah. I think with Tucker, some of it is he's just got no experience. Heidi Schroeder. Yes. Okay. Good. So you have seen those ones in America. Excellent. Yeah. I mean, they're everywhere in Australia. I mean, I remember those escalators back in the 90s. I mean, those shopping trolleys back in the 90s here. And nobody, I don't remember, Meg, 100% keep waiting for MAGA to find their self-respect. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Meg. Yeah, it's true, because it's like they have no self-respect. And I just think, I'm going to be honest, there are times where I actually feel sorry for it. I do. And it happens occasionally. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to open up, right? Be vulnerable. I'm just going to say that just occasionally, and it's when they really, really lie to them all the time, because I just think, what kind of life must you have lived, right, to believe that? What kind of education were you given as a child to believe that? You know what I mean? because it's one thing to fall for something once or twice or three times, but they've been falling for this since 2016. I know there's a lot of people in 2016, right? Even people like on Substack, like Joe Walsh. I don't know how many people here know Joe Walsh. He's got a Substack video and all that. Heidi, they appear to not be able to find their own feet, let alone their self-respect. I agree, Heidi. Yeah, it's true. They can't seem to. They can't see. It's like they're having issues in their life, and they think Trump is a savior who's going to make them feel better, right? When the truth is that economically, Trump is going to make their lives worse. They're voting against their own self-interest. And that's what's so crazy. Like when you see all those working class areas, which basically gave Trump the election, right? And I think he's going to make your life worse. And you're voting for him because he got you obsessed with some trans person who's like playing sports somewhere in America, like 0.00000. How can you make such a niche issue, such a big issue is insane. Like this whole cultural thing. And they do it on purpose because it's a good way to divert attention away from things like the economy. If you can get people obsessed about culture wars, right? About trans people, about, DEI, all this sort of stuff, right? Especially working class people and that sort of area. And then you can stop people thinking about the economy, especially when you're not the incumbent. And Stockholm Syndrome, Heidi. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, the thing interesting is, I was talking about Joe Walsh, who's on Substack. Joe Walsh is an ex-Republican congressman, right? And I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago on Substack. He asked me to come on his show. And he basically said to me that in 2016, right, he voted for Donald Trump because he wanted to blow up the system, right? And that's true. In 2016, there are a lot of people who wanted to blow up the system. And they thought, even if I don't like Donald Trump, let's blow up the system and create something brand new and whatever, start from scratch. But he realized pretty soon that Donald Trump is not the right person to do that. And he's now like a massive anti-Trumper. He's now become a Democrat recently, and he's out there every day fighting against Trump, right? But what it goes to show is that people like Joe Walsh saw pretty quickly what was going on. But many other people, right? And Joe Walsh is obviously an educated guy. He was a Republican, he was a congressman, all that, right? But there's many, many others who didn't see that because he got more votes in 2024 than he did in 2016. So you can say, okay, you made a mistake in 2016, right? But now 10 years later, you've seen him try to overthrow an election, right? You've seen him do all these crazy stuff. You've seen indictments against him. You've seen him, sexual harassment. But the people were not listening and they don't care. I really do believe that people, if you convince someone, if you're a leader and you convince someone that you're going to make their life better economically, right? They will vote for that person, even if they think that person is authoritarian. And you see that overseas as well, right? People who have thought, because they think he's a strong man, he will help with the economy, whatever, stuff like that. It always goes, Meg, as it relates to educated MAGA, they don't care. They don't think he's going to save them. They know he's a fool. They only care about owning the libs. They're treating the country like a UFC fight. Yeah, I agree with that partly. Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah. I think that's something he's a fool. There's definitely a own the libs thing out there, which you're right, Megs, is just so crazy. Like they're willing to own the libs, even if it hurts themselves. It's just so insane. Like the politics has become to them, to MAGA, I feel like it's a sport, right? Like Meg is saying, like it's like a UFC match or something, right? I do agree with that. And a lot of the people who support them like UFC, like that sort of thing, and they're obviously watching Joe Rogan, meatheads, yeah, yeah, meatheads, peanut brains, worn up brains. There's plenty of names, but I think it's hard to get through those people because there are people like Joe Walsh who are smart enough to come out of that, but then there are other people who, like years later, are not coming out of that, and I think there's various reasons. I think one is that he did in 2024 somehow manage to make himself anti-establishment again, even though he'd been in power for 4 years. So I think that helped him. I think because Trump is such a is so horrible, right? That some people maybe on the left who are more skeptical of government, right? More, might say some things about, okay, we agree with 99% of scientists, but they might occasionally say, oh, look, let's get some more information on that, right? Before Trump, normal people could question things, right? Without going, what am I on my accounts? What am I on my Substack account and in my other accounts? I have a saying by Carl Sagan, the scientist, and he said this. It was back in the 70s, I think he said it. He said it pays to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. And the reason I put that on my thing is because that encapsulates the MAGA movement, right? You can give them, they're like, okay, well, we're skeptical about the COVID vaccines. We just want to ask some questions. Okay, go for it. Okay, sure. It just come out, whatever. Ask some questions. Here's the answers. No, that's not good enough. Okay, here's some more answers. That's not good enough. Okay, 5 years have gone by now and there's not millions of people dying. No, I still don't believe it. There's no point that they can get to where, okay, ask the first question, Heidi, do you think they are so deep into it that they just can't admit they are wrong? Yeah, I think so. And I think, you know what, Heidi, I think there's definitely an element of that because what you're just saying now, Heidi, is what I was thinking about, right, during this whole Epstein thing that we're seeing right now, where basically, where, even Elon Musk came out and said that, the reason he's not releasing the files is because he's in it, right? And I've seen online recently, especially on Twitter, because I'm still on Twitter, I'm masochist. And I'm still on Twitter, but I saw online that some of them were like, instead of saying that he's not in the list now, because they're always saying he wasn't in there, they're now backtracking a little bit, but just slightly, right? Just slightly. And they're saying, well, Bill Clinton's in there as well. Well, yeah. Meg, it amazes me that they refuse to turn that laser focused skepticism to the current admin. Heidi, yeah, yes, that's right. Yeah, Heidi did nail it. Yep. Yeah, you're right. I know, I know, I know. That's the thing. Like, that's the hilarious bit about it, right? They they are anti-establishment until their person until their person is in power, and the most establishment person in the world. Because if you're against like Biden or Kamala or Obama because they're like, they're the president, but then suddenly you're like, now Trump's the president, and you're like, everything Trump says is great. Then you're like, okay, so now you're for the government. So you do love the government. You just don't like the government when it doesn't say you something. Again, they are the Trump party is not anti-establishment. The MAGA people are not anti-establishment. They want the establishment to be what they believe, right? They want their own establishment, an establishment that agrees with everything they say. They don't care about the deep state. They care about a deep state that agrees with everything they say, right? So that's all it is. So this whole anti-deep state, anti-establishment is just BS because they want to be in charge of that, right? And they want to be able to just create their own things. So I agree. They have contradictory views with everything. I don't even think they know they have contradictory views. I think some probably do, but they see Trump as the outsider. They saw that with the Epstein. They said, oh, when he gets in power, he's gonna release the Epstein files, right? And there's going to be Democrats running for cover everywhere. And they thought that. They thought, oh, and so many people online saying, Joe, to me, Joe, wait till the Epstein files come out and you're going to see every single Democrat, all these liberals, and they're all going to be like that. And I'm like, Heidi, right, socialism was the worst thing in the world, but fascism, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, exactly. Well, there is definitely an authoritarian thing to Trump. And if you look at like a lot of the people, I don't necessarily think Trump is Hitler. I think Trump is more like Viktor Orban from Hungary. And basically what it is he's an authoritarian, right, who wants to basically try to have a facade that he's not an authoritarian, which is what Viktor Orban does. He tries to say, he tells the press, okay, he takes power away from the press, right? But he doesn't take the complete power away. He takes power away from the courts. MAGA absolutely refuses to acknowledge Project 2025. Trump is a convenient puppet. Meg, yeah, yeah, and he denied Project 2025 all the time, but he always did it like Trump always does this thing. And again, I never know. I never know if MAGA see the patterns. I probably not, but he'll say stuff like, "Oh," and a journalist will say to him, Project 2025. Oh, I've never heard of that. I'm hearing this for the first time. He always says that. I've never heard of that. I'm hearing this for the first time. And he repeats that with anything that he doesn't know about, right? Just like the most obvious things. Like there was something like not that long ago where where Yemen got bombed. And he said, I don't know about that. I'm hearing that for the first time. He didn't know that his own administration was bombing Houthis. Like, how did you not know that? But I just think he just says that, right? When he doesn't know how to answer the question. And he knows, again, his base will just go along with it. But pretty much everything on Project 2025 is coming true. And in fact, a lot of the things that the Liberals said, right? And there was a lot of centrists, right? Um, yeah, MAGA absolutely refuses to acknowledge Project 25. Trump is a convenient puppet. That's true. That's true, Meg. Yeah, he is. But Meg, the other thing I was going to say is that not only does he not acknowledge 2025, but he's actually worse than 2020. If you actually read 2025, he goes further than that, like way further than that. So it's actually in a way, he's so I think a lot of the stuff that we're seeing now is the early days of Trump's authoritarianism. It's going to get worse and worse. But the thing is that the MAGA movement just don't have the brain capacity to sort of see what's happening with what he's doing. Eventually, I think he's going to stop listening to the courts. I really do believe that because he can see that his base, like even though his polling is going down, it's not going down anywhere near where it should be. Right? It should be way lower. There is obviously this base of Trump supporters who, no matter what he does, will stick with him, right? And it doesn't seem to matter what it is. And I do think it's part of it is own the libs. I think part of it is they've stuck in this, world of they think that he's anti-establishment, all that sort of stuff. But I do think things like the Epstein files, where there's a few of them starting to question, it's the first time in a long time, right? Because MAGA people are very online. They're very obsessed with like conspiracies, right? So the Epstein thing is an interesting thing because nobody's more like I don't hear many liberals talking about the Epstein files. Like liberals don't like what Jeffrey Epstein does, but we're not obsessed with it every day. I don't spend every day thinking about Epstein, right? He was a horrible person, all that. But there's many horrible people, right? But for MAGA, they're obsessed with everything. Everything is Epstein this. Oh, is that person on the Epstein list? Like if they don't like someone like a celebrity, he's on the Epstein list. No evidence. Tom Hanks is on the Epstein list. Evidence? No, I just think he is. Okay, great. Trust me, trust me, bro. It seems to be their sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of that. Um, for the first time, I'm starting to see a little bit of a kink in their armor just with the Epstein thing because they take it so seriously and they've taken it seriously for years. But again, this goes back to the insanity of the MAGA movement where you have a movement that for years was obsessed with Epstein and everything. And the person that they're voting for, or they've voted for twice, was the person who had the closest relationship to Epstein, right? So Kamala obviously had no relationship to Epstein. Joe Biden had no relationship to Epstein, right? But then, and yet Trump is the person that they think is going to release the files, is going to expose the whole thing, right? When Max, what's her name? Yeah, the wife, no, it wasn't the wife, it was the partner. Thank you for the love hearts, whoever that is. I don't know where they come from. But yeah, so, when she went on, Maxine Gassel, what's her name? I can't remember her name. But yeah, she was the partner of Jeffrey Epstein, and she got taken to court and she was found guilty, right, of trafficking. And the courts and the journalist, he was talking about something else, and the journalist said, "What do you feel about her going, Susie Hammett? How can he not know about Project 25 when he's one of its authors? Russell Boyd was named the director of the Office of Management and Budget in February this year. Surely he'd have been background." Oh, no, no. Yeah, no, Susie, he 100% knows about it. Absolutely. He just does that. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Paolo. Maxwell. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're talking about people who hang out in Dallas waiting for John F. Kennedy to rise. It's so true. Yeah, yeah. I know. They did, yeah, yeah. Maxwell, thank you. Yeah, they do. Like, they just, like, they're obsessed with everything Epstein, right? And yet he's the guy that they it's just insane. It's like everything they do. Um, yeah, Susie Spelling, got it. Yeah, yeah, but and then basically they say about Max. They talk about they ask him. He's standing up there, and they say to him, they said the journalist says, "Well, she's just been found guilty of trafficking, sex trafficking," and the journalist says, "Is there anything you want to say to her? Is there anything you want to say?" But and he looks at the camera, looks straight down the camera, and he says, "I wish her well. I wish her well." I was like, "What the?" He's looking down the camera like Trump. Well, Trump gives everybody nicknames, right? Everybody gets a nickname he doesn't like. He says horrible things about people all the time. So we're not talking about someone who has a pattern of wishing people well, right? But for her, Maxwell, he was like, wish well. And I'm thinking, now I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I know when people say that, generally the next thing they say is a conspiracy. But this time, I think there's something to it. But I do believe that the only reason he would say that is if he thinks that she's in prison and she's got some dirt on him. Who knows what that dirt is? I'm not saying what it is, right? And she's going to talk in prison to get some time off, right? And so he just looks down the camera and says, "I wish her well." That's the most, like, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to believe that. Why else would you say that, right? And that's the thing. Like, you got someone who socialized with him on a regular basis. He did. He socialized with him on a regular basis. They lived next to each other in Florida. And they were in the same social circles for years. So, but this is the people. And so she says that. Then after that, he goes on Fox News, right, before the election. And Brett Baer is being interviewed by Brett Baer and someone else. And they said to him, "Are you going to release the MLK files?" And he goes, "Yes." Martha, okay, Martha, Luther King. Okay, yeah. The JFK files. Yep, I'm going to release them. Absolutely. Thank you for the love hearts. Not sure who it is. I think might be Janine, the love hearts. I'm not sure. Thank you. But yeah, he then says, yeah. And so I'm like thinking, wait a second. How is it possible, right? That so he's having this interview and they're asking him all this stuff, and he goes, "Oh," and then the next thing that I said to him is, "Oh, what about the Jeffrey Epstein files? They're going to release those." And he goes, "Yeah," and then he's backtracked and he goes, "Maybe less so, less so. There's a lot of phony accusations in there, right?" And he goes, I don't want to put phony accusations out in there." And I'm like, okay, so now we've got a pattern here. We've got someone who socialized with Epstein for decades, right? Thank you for the love hearts. Socialized with Epstein for decades, right? And now this person is looking down the camera and saying to Maxwell, "I wish her well," after she's been found guilty of sex trafficking, right? He's now on Fox News saying, yeah, I'm not sure about releasing the Epstein files because there are phony accusations against people. Now, I think Donald Trump only cares about himself. So if Donald Trump is saying there's phony accusations, there's only one person he would care about, and that's himself. So maybe the most rational thing is that the phony accusations, thank you for the love hearts, phony accusations are actually about him, but they might not be that phony. Who knows? I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. But, that's the most rational explanation. Now, MAGA, right, have seen all this, and they still came to the conclusion that Trump is the person to expose the deep state and the Epstein files. I mean, how much more? I mean, yes, okay. So I'm trying, the other thing is about this interview they did on Fox News is that we all know that Kamala Harris was interviewed, I think it was on 60 Minutes, and they slightly edited it. So they took out some and ahs, which is really common in journalism when you're trying to break it down. You want to just get out the conversations and you want to take out the dead air, right? That's all they did. Now, when Trump found out about it and MAGA found out, they said, oh my God, this is election interference, right? Because they edited out to get rid of arms and ahs, and that was to make her look better. That's what they're saying. And that's a selection. And Trump said that 60 Minutes should be fired. And Elon Musk, the free speech absolutist, then said, he tweeted out that those producers should be in jail for a long time. He wants to imprison journalists who edited some ums and ahs out of it, right? So now think about that editing versus the editing they did on Fox News after Donald Trump went on there and he said phony accusations. What they did is that bit they didn't release till later after someone leaked it. The initial, right, he's exposing the deep state, all right, and it's him. That's right. That's right, Heidi. Yeah, he's exposing himself as a deep state, but his base is so stupid they can't actually see that the breadcrumbs go to Donald Trump. So, so Fox News edited that bit out where he was saying that he wasn't sure about the Epstein files. So when you watch the original Fox News interview, because it wasn't live, it didn't bring up the Jeffrey Epstein files. The only thing it said is when he first was asked about Jeffrey Epstein files, he said yes, but then he backtracks after that, right? So they in the actual show that you watch, they cut it out after he says yes. They take all the bits out where he says maybe less so. There's a lot of phony. They cut that out. Somebody at Fox News leaked that, and then they had to put it back in. Now, if they want to imprison reporters for editing out ums and ahs, right, of Kamala Harris to make her look better, then what do they do? What should be the sentence for people at Fox News who want to edit out a whole bit about him being skeptical about the Epstein files? Considering his base are obsessed with that. That is like ums and ahs and trying to protect him, right, from not getting, his base getting angry at him. The reality is that even if they showed that the first time and not had to show it again, his base still would have gone along with it because they'd blame everybody except for him. I sometimes feel that Trump at night, right, is such an asshole that he sometimes thinks, how far could I push my audience, my base, to what could I do to turn them off me? Is there anything I could do to turn them off me? Because he knows they're a cult because in 2016, right, he basically said they're a cult when he said, I could shoot someone on the street and I wouldn't lose a vote. Now, yeah, he was being hyperbolic, but he was right. A large chunk of his audience would have stayed with him, right? So again, it's almost like nothing he can do, right? It's almost like nothing he can do to lose his base. And I do think sometimes like, I wonder if I did something really, really crazy, how many of them would go? You know what I mean? Because I don't know what it is, because now we're seeing the Epstein files. Yes, there's a slight amount of pushback on that one, especially when people in his FBI are saying that, a lot of these people, they were hoping would come into administration. They were handpicked by Donald Trump, Dan Bongino and all that. And they were hoping that FBI, they were going to come in and expose the deep state. And instead, they go on Joe Rogan and say, Epstein killed himself. There's no there. And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what happened. I don't know. It's possible that he did because he's like a 60-year-old man, whatever, at the time. He's just been told that he's probably never going to be released from prison. Um, he's lived this, very, exciting life in terms of not just what he was like what I mean by that is like in terms of he used to fly. Apparently, he would get on a private jet on a Saturday morning, and he'd fly to like France to have breakfast. Right, so this extravagant lifestyle that he was living, where he was eating the best foods in the world, the best. That's what he was used to. There was no what. How would someone like that survive in prison if that's what you're used to, right? And he was being told by his lawyers he's not going to get out. So I could totally see someone like that being a coward and killing himself. So I don't know. I wasn't there, but I could see that. I wouldn't see that. I've never seen that as like, how is it possible that's true? I don't know. I don't know what's true, but it's plausible he did, right? But when the lawyer, when Dan Bongino was on there on Fox on Rogan, he said that his base went crazy online. They were like, "Why is he saying that? That's weird." He's now compromised, right? So he's now compromised because he said that, right? But they didn't blame. What I always find hilarious is they didn't blame Donald Trump. They come up with these mental gymnastics, which is always fun to watch. I love their mental gymnastics when something like this happens. Like they were like coming out with like, no, this isn't Trump's fault. And they say it like I will say something to him, and they'll like repeat back to me like completely serious, deadpan, which is even funnier. No, you don't understand. See, it's the deep state is trying to undermine Donald Trump, and they compromise the people around him. Yeah. So again, it's always the people around him. It's never Donald Trump. Uh, Donald Trump will never come out and say, Susie, he does what all narcissists do, slowly ramps up the scam to see who can get away with, like the proverbial boiling frogs. Yeah, exactly, Susie. He does. He's a con artist. And that's the other, speaking like, Susie just reminded me of this, like years ago, before, right, before he actually got into politics, he started a thing called Trump University, except it actually wasn't a university, right? And he had to close it down because a judge called it a scam, right? And he was getting sued by all these people. Now, that was a scam, and that's the person that they trusted, right? That was the person they trusted to basically come into the government in 2024, set up Doge, right? And then go looking for fraud and waste. They trusted the guy who's a convicted fraudster and started Trump University and all these other fraudulent things that he did. That's the person they trust, right, to go looking for fraud and waste with Doge. Again, like it's just insane. Like I don't even know enough. There's just so many examples of MAGA just being so stupid and gullible, right? One of the first things that Doge does is it gets rid of the white collar police, right? A government agency that was looking for fraud. So, for example, if an average American got done with fraud, they go to this agency, they would try to recoup their money for them, or they would go after the company. They defunded that. So they defunded the fraud police, right? Then you look at all of Trump's pardons, pretty much except for January 6th, all his other pardons have been white collar criminals. He's surrounded by white collar criminals. Steve Bannon, his right hand man, right, started up years ago when Trump first president, a startup fund, right, a fund for, I think it was a GoFundMe fund for a Build the Wall fund, where he was asking Trump supporters, his own supporters, MAGA supporters, to pay him money, right, so they could build a wall, right, a fund like that. He got convicted of fraud because him and someone else in that fund, right, took out $1 million for themselves out of that fund. Now, here you have one of Trump's closest friends, right, Steve Bannon, he's not just a fraudster, he's a fraudster stealing from MAGA people, because all the people who were giving money was MAGA. They weren't liberals giving money to build the wall. It was all MAGA. He was stealing from his own people. And then Trump pardons him. Trump pardons him, right? And nobody cares. It's let's move on. No big deal. So just to recap, Steve Bannon, who basically is the MAGA movement, steals from Trump supporters, Trump pardons him, and they still think Trump is the person who's going to get rid of fraud and waste. You know, there's just so many examples where it's basically putting the fox in charge of their hen house. It really is. Like, it's just like I sometimes think that fraudsters, people who like fraudsters out there are thinking, I would pay big money to get my hands on a database of MAGA supporters. Absolutely, they would. If you could get like a phone or all their mobile numbers, cell phone numbers, I think that's what you call them, get all their cell phone numbers, I think fraudsters would love it because it'd be like they have seen these people just believe the most stupidest things, fall for the most ridiculous things, and they're probably thinking these people would be so easy to con, so easy. You would. There must be a database of MAGA people that is just handed around to fraudsters out there because they would be easy pickings. They would be absolutely easy pickings. There's never been a demographic that is so gullible as the MAGA movement, and I think there's different parts of it. Some people are gullible. I think some of it is own the libs, like we said before, and then some of them is like, um, yeah, they're like, they've just younger people brought up in this sort of anti-woke thing, and they're obsessed with everything woke. Everything is like woke this, woke, there is a little bit that with young people who've grown up online a lot. Um, and that's another thing. Like, when Trump first came in 2016, I don't believe Trump is anti-trans, and I don't believe he's anti-gay. And the reason I don't believe that is because if you listen to Trump before 2016, he was actually quite open-minded because he was back in New York. He grew up in New York. One of his closest friends and lawyer was a guy called Roy Cohn, who was basically right his right-hand man who got him out of a lot of trouble. Right, he was like he was basically this guy who helped blackmail politicians so he could buy developments and all that sort of stuff. So but Roy Cohn was gay, and he knew he was gay, and he didn't care, right? When when Trump first came into power in 2016, um, Donald Trump was basically came into power. There was Caitlyn Jenner, and he said to Caitlyn Jenner publicly, he said, she can use any of our toilets in any of my hotels. I don't care about stuff like that. So I think personally, he doesn't get, and you know what? I actually think that's worse because if you actually believe that, it's still bad. But if you don't believe that, but you push that, I think that's worse. Like it's like you don't believe it yourself, but you're willing to do it because your base likes that sort of stuff, right? Um, I think that's 100 times worse. And so he got them obsessed with the woke stuff, the cancer stuff, and I think that myself, um, is one of the reasons why I think he got a lot of the young people in, because they love this cancer culture thing and stuff like that. But again, it's so hypocritical because the people obsessed about woke is is Trump, is the Republican Party. During the 2024 elections, as I said before, Democrats didn't mention woke, but Trump was obsessed talking about it. He couldn't talk about it. They loved talking about it. It was like constantly, not in a good way, but like, you got Pete Hegseth out there who wants to take the name of Harvey Milk, who was like a gay activist in San Francisco in the 70s, right? He wants to take his name off a naval ship because it's too woke. Like, it's just like, haven't you got, like, is that all he's doing as a defenseman? If he did less of that stuff, which means, and more of like trying to keep secrets, that'd probably be a good thing. That would be a good thing for I feel Democrats aren't very good at marketing and doing stuff the way the Trump administration is. There is so many things that the Trump administration that Democrats could do that I feel that because they're a bit distance from stuff, they don't do, and it's to their own detriment. And a couple of things that I think is really important is one is in Australia, a couple of months ago, we had an election and a centre left government won. The centre right government tried to jump on the Trump train. It's not as bad as Trump. It's not like that. But because when they saw Trump won, right, in November last year, they thought, and there was a bit of momentum behind Trump. They thought, oh, we might, get a bit of this for ourselves. So they started talking about Doge and all that. This was before, it's before Trump was putting on tariffs and all that stuff. Where that's when his ratings started coming down. But before then, he had a bit of momentum. So this, they jumped on it, and they started doing a few woke stuff as well. Like the left wing parties are too woke, so they did that sort of woke culture stuff. And how our centre left government got around that is they did something brilliantly, and I think the Democrats should do this with the Trump with Republicans, no matter who's in power. If they try to do the whole woke thing again, is that left wing said, look, they said the truth. They said the only people here talking about woke are you guys. We're concentrating on building more homes so people can afford, so renters, more homes, rents come down, right? More homes, housing prices come, they don't go up as much, more homes, build homes. It helps a lot of tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, right? You're now getting working class people coming into your party, right? You're getting young people coming into your party, right? Who want to buy a home for the first time or are renting, right? So you got tradespeople, you got this, that, and then they said that's what we're concentrating on. But you guys, if you want to spend all your time talking about woke or how much you hate it, go for it. But I think the average Australian wants to know about what's best, how to make their life better financially. This way, and it worked a treat. It absolutely worked. Not only did they win, they won by a massive landslide. I mean, and no one was expecting that because in Australia, elections are generally quite close. So I really do think that the Democratic Party could learn from other countries is to flip it on the Republican Party that they are, because what you have is it's actually true. It's actually true that Republicans are obsessed with talking about woke, right? They said after 2024 that woke is dead. They all said it. Trump said it. All the people. Woke is dead because Trump won. Yet they continue to talk about it every day. They don't want woke to be dead because woke is not a thing for them. It's only a political weapon for them. And they don't want it to die, right? Because again, I knew that was a lie that they said that woke is dead because Democrats never ran on woke. So why would it? It's just the whole thing's a lie. It's a facade. Yeah. So again, when you know that Democrats didn't run on woke and you know that Republicans just obsessed about talking that subject, you knew they weren't going to stop talking about it afterwards because they think that's what helped them win. The Democrats can beat this by not throwing people under the bus who are gay or anything. You don't do that. And that no one here did that either. Is by concentrating on economic things. At the end of the day, people vote for economic reasons. And a lot of those people who aren't following politics every day, which is a big chunk these days, because you have streaming services, TikTok, there's so many other diversions people have these days, is to hit something. They do listen when it's got to do with their everyday living experience. And I mean like rent, home prices, that sort of thing, grocery prices. That's what a lot of people listen to, and that's what brings them in, right? And if Democrats just concentrated on something like homes, and then that's going to get working class people in there because, again, electricians, they all build homes, all those people, carpenters, all that. You're bringing all those people into the mix, and then and then when Republicans talk about, oh, what about that trans person? That one trans person, and they go, look, sorry, you guys are obsessed with talking about that, but I think people in Pennsylvania, I think people in Wisconsin, they're more worried about homes, right? They're more worried about jobs that get created by building homes. But you guys talk about work as much as you want. That's a winning strategy. That is absolutely a winning strategy. And unfortunately, in America, him getting indicted, people talking about him, being lying all the time, which he does. I believe in all those things, but that's not what's going to get you voted in, because so much of America thinks both sides are as bad as each other, right? They think it's all a theatre. They're not engaged every day. So when we see all the indictments and we see, the Jack Smith case and all that, they're not seeing that. They're just seeing, and by the way, I'm not talking about the MAGA base here, because Trump can't win with just the MAGA base. I'm talking about independents. I'm talking about people who don't follow each side and might say both sides, but they go and vote for one, right? Those are the people who got him across the line. It wasn't just the MAGA base. Those people are malleable. They could come back, right? They could go back to the other people is the people who didn't vote, and there was many people who didn't vote. So getting those out, um, you're not going to get them out by saying Trump is an awful person. You're going to get them out by saying, here's things that we can do to make your life better. Real things, right? Things about, homes, grocery, all these things. That's what's going to get people's ears perking up, and that's what's going to get them back on track to win. But yeah, in the chat, just let me know if you agree with me or you don't agree with me. But I do think, let me just have a drink of water because we've been talking. I do think that the 2024 election pretty much put into my head that focusing on Trump will definitely help, but focusing on other stuff will help even more. So I think in the midterms, midterms is different, but it really does depend on who wins the who goes to the next election. If it's Trump, I think depends on what happens between now and then. But yeah, I think focusing on economic things is a great way to get to beat the Republicans and the MAGA movement, because you can't win without those Rust Belt states, and that's what they care about. And it's a shame, because it really is a shame, because I think people should Heidi. I think Kamala did talk about all those. Yeah, she did, but it wasn't. I know she talked about those things, Heidi, but it wasn't like they did in Australia. There was 10 million plus more Democratic voting in 2020. You're right. They need a positive reason to get out and vote. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she did. And Heidi, she did talk about it, but it wasn't front and center. And towards the end, they started going back to Trump as authoritarian, and and all that. And that's what was getting all the news, right? All the news was Trump. And I get that. I understand why they did that, right? I understand why they went there. But it wasn't if you go back and look at that election, it was kind of, here's some housing stuff, here's some stuff we'll hear, but Trump is an awful person, bang, bang, bang. It really needs to be hyper focused. All your ads, I'm talking 95% is about homes or some big medical thing. In Australia, what they did is they did two things. One was homes, and that's what they talked about 99% of the time. The other one was building, and I don't know if America's got a similar problem, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be something similar, is where, you have people might get something that you go to your local doctor for, not something you go to your hospital for, right? But it's 8:00 at night and they're closed, right? So you don't want to go to a hospital room because you've got something that's not that bad, like a flu or something, right? And so you've got to wait in the hospital room. So we set up these clinics. They're 24-hour doctor clinics, not like a hospital, just for the same things that you would go for every day. And we set them up 24-hour ones. So you can take your kids at 10:00 at night to go just see a local doctor, right? And we put them all over Australia. That was a massive thing as well, right? And that doesn't just affect, now you've got the home thing, which affects a lot of guys because it's like buildings and stuff like that, right? But it also affects everybody because everyone wants to, it's more construction, is more man-based, but in terms of homes, everyone wants to live in a home, rent and stuff like that. But the medical thing, in a lot of medical practices, it's usually 70%, 80% female focus. So you're getting both genders, both demographics in there, people from different demographics, high, low. And then, of course, you still talk about Trump being an authoritarian and all that stuff, but it has to be at the lower end for that, because you need to get those people in with economics, and it needs to be front and center. And it can't just be one of, all these different things that you're doing. It really has to be a focus, because people are just not focusing on politics these days. They're not. They're really, since COVID especially, there's a huge group of people watching TikTok, or they're too busy to concentrate on it. And you need to get something, and it needs to be a positive thing. It needs to be something that they can go, okay, that policy is going to make my life better. Yeah, that I'm paying too much rent. There's not enough homes. Okay, great. I'm a 22-year-old. I can't afford to buy, maybe older than 22, but I can't afford to buy a home, right? This is going to maybe make prices not go up as high. Here's a new hospital that's, new cheap clinic that's going to open. Okay, that's great as well. That's the type of stuff people vote for, and Trump, because of the way he is, it's natural to want to call him out on all the crazy stuff he does, right? Of course you want to do it, but he floods the market, he floods the airways with all that. And then there's no room for Kamala to talk about housing. There's no room to talk about anything else. It's all about Trump is either saying stupid stuff, Trump is lying again for the 100th time. Trump gets graded on a curve, right? One of the things that he's done is normalized lying. He's really normalized it. Trump has worked out that if you lie 100 times a day, you get graded on a curve and you get away with it. But if you lie once every 6 months or once every 3 months, the media will call you out for being a liar because they're not expecting it from you. It's out of the blue. But if you're doing it 100 times a day, they're like, that's just Trump. And so he gets graded on a curve like a toddler. He gets graded like a toddler. He's treated like a toddler, right? In the media, right? He gets away with pretty much anything. So that's the problem. And these days, you've got to fight for eyeballs. And it's very hard to get people's attention, people's eyeballs, right? So the only way to get people's eyeballs is not that they're hearing the same thing that Trump is lying, because they hear that a million times a day. That's not going to, except for people like us who follow politics, for a lot of people, that's not going to, that's like, well, I haven't got time for that. I've got 2 children. I've got, whatever. So, but if you say something that affects their life, or they have children and affects their children's life, like childcare or something like that, then that's going to get it. But you have to tell that story all the time, because it's, chances are you say it 100 times, they're only listening to it once, right? So, and you've got to get it on the right platforms. I think it was a mistake, right? I'm not talking about the Joe Rogans, but you don't have to go on that. I think it's ridiculous how they go on about we need the left Joe Rogan. No, we don't need the left. A left Joe Rogan would be like a conspiracy guy, right? Who thinks that, who thinks like, RFK does. Like, we don't need that, right? We just need something to happen. You can't manufacture that, right? You can't make a Joe Rogan believe. Let it happen organically, and it will happen organically, right? When when new people come about, Joe Rogan's famous now, but he might not be in 2 years. And just be natural, right? Sometimes Democrats in the Democratic Party can sound a little bit, what's the word? I don't want to say robotic, but not robotic. What's the word I'm looking for? Just a little bit too consultative, right? A little bit too, almost like too polished. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's a big movement away from sounding too polished and sounding more authentic. Now, authentic, it's a bit of a nuanced thing, because MAGA think Trump is authentic, right? Out of touch. Yeah, that's right, mate. MAGA think Trump is authentic, right? This is the big thing that they talk about. Trump is authentic. They repeat it all the time. Joe Rogan says, Trump is authentic. That doesn't mean that's a good thing. If you're an authentic arsehole, or you're an authentic liar, or you're authentic like someone's that's not a good thing, right? Just because they're being authentic about it. But for people who are younger, right, and they go on vibes or impressions, it's not based on like actual, these aren't people going to look at policy, right? They're not going to look at a healthcare policy and go, good. They're going to look at, oh man, he destroyed him, man. Did you see this? That's kind of like that sort of like immature. And you'd be surprised how many of the MAGA people who are very online Twitter think like that, right? Oh yeah, he's authentic, an authentic dark triad narcissist. Yeah, he is. I mean, that's the thing, but they do think he's authentic because he says stupid stuff all the time, or he calls people nicknames. Now, this is ridiculous because I'll tell you, Kamala Harris, if you compare Kamala to Trump, Kamala Harris comes across as more polished, more educated, and usually in the past, that would have been she won, Trump loses because he's saying stupid stuff, right? Because back in the day before Trump, people were losing for like really silly stuff. Back years ago in 2004, I don't know how old you are, but there was a guy called Howard Dean who ran as a Democrat, and he was coming first in the primaries, and then he was at a rally and he did this like a screech thing, like it was nothing, right? Because of that, went through the media. He lost because of that. Just the most mildest thing in the world. But Trump has made it now so anything is now authentic, right? And there is a tiny bit of good in that, not like Trump does, but maybe people can just talk more normally. You know what I mean? But we need someone not like Trump, definitely not like Trump, but someone who sounds more natural. To me, that person who still sounds professional in that is someone like Pete Buttigieg, right? When I see him, like, and I don't know if people watch his stuff, but he's been going on all these, I want to say like MAGA podcasts. They're like it's like the Joe Rogan, not Joe Rogan, but it's like around him. He has all these YouTubers and stuff. And he's been going, a lot of these people voted for Trump, but they are open to changing their mind. They were people who probably voted for Obama, right? And he's gone on those shows and he's done really well. I mean, really well. Like they liked him a lot, right? Because he was just he was just being himself, and and being himself wasn't being Trump, right? And he was talking about stuff intelligently, unlike Trump does, and and that was it, and that was being authentic. And I think that's authentic, not what Trump does. I think what Trump does is basically giving people an impression that being authentic is being an arsehole. I really do think that the part of the MAGA movement think is the more of an arsehole you are, the more authentic you are. And if you're not an arsehole, then you're not really being yourself, right? You're really an arsehole. So basically, they think everyone else is an arsehole like them, right? And we're just pretending not to be assholes. Therefore, we're not being authentic. So when they see Trump doing all the, giving people nicknames and all that sort of stuff, I just think, well, yeah, Paulo, Pete is actually highly polished, but he has a down to earth feeling. I wonder if homophobia makes him an unelectable. Look, unfortunately, Paulo, yeah, him being gay, I think it worries me just in the sense of the states that he has to win, like Pennsylvania, like the working class states. But there's another part of me that thinks that if because he is the way he is, right? Because he's willing to go to places where other Democrats don't, that he could go on shows where working class people watch, and he would get on so well with those people because he's the kind of guy. He goes, by the way, he goes on Fox News all the time. He's the kind of guy who can go on any show. Same states would be no go for anyone. Some states would be no go for anyone. Yeah, but I do think that I don't. Yeah, I do think him being gay is a problem. But if anybody could do it, it would be him, right? And that's because he's willing to talk to anybody. And people, even some independents or whatever, so I'm not talking about the full base, they're always going to vote. I'm thinking about just people a little bit more open-minded. If they saw him go on a podcast that a lot of people in Pennsylvania working class watch, right? Then any Democrat I meant, yeah. I think they would give him points for doing it. I do. I think they're the kind of people, and I've actually met in the 90s and stuff. I met people in Australia who were like not big on gay people, but they lived in they actually grew up in areas where there wasn't a lot of gay people, so their parents were home. They got that homophobia from their parents, right? And then when they were like 19 or 20, they left school and they got a job, and then they would work in a place where there was gay people, and like I worked in one of those places, and I worked in marketing, and basically what I found is that they would come in and they knew that because I had a girlfriend at the time, and they would say, "Oh, that guy, yeah, is he gay?" And I go, "Yeah, he's gay, yeah." And they're like, "Oh, I'm just not really comfortable, like that." And you could tell them like within 2 weeks we'd go out for drinks on a Friday, and they would talk, and the next day I'd see that guy, the homophobic guy, and he'd be like, "Oh, he's amazing. I love that guy. I can't believe oh my God, he's the best guy ever." It's because he never met anyone. He never had a friendship with that type of person. So I think a lot of that is They don't have people around them who are gay. They don't meet people like that. So I sometimes think if they were exposed to someone like Pete Buttigieg on shows that they watch, they would go, "Oh, he's actually, except for all those memes they send around, actually he's a pretty reasonable guy. He's a pretty nice guy." Um, so again, I think it would be problematic having him there because of that. But if anybody could do it, it would be Pete Buttigieg. Yeah, I just think, and I think it's such a shame that that's such a barrier for someone like him. But yeah, anyway, um, Meg, Pete is fantastic. I don't think it's because he's gay. He's a Democrat. My gut says we are stuck with Christian nationalist fascism until the resistance represents a broader coalition and establishment Democratic candidates. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he is kind of like, I do think the gay thing would play a part in certain places because of the electoral college vote. You're stuck with having to win states like the Rust Belt. You can't win without them unless you go down south, and then that's just as bad. So you have to kind of go into that area. I think, I think it's I think it's a good idea is to get people who are um, voting, get people who are voting for who are not voting for anybody at all. They're not voting for either side, and get them out to vote because the amount of people who aren't voting in America is huge. I don't know if you know this. I've talked about it before, but you might have heard it. Sorry if you're hearing it for the second time. In Australia, we have compulsory voting, and when I was speaking to Josh, right? Joe Walsh, the American guy who's an ex-Trump supporter. He's a libertarian. Well, he's a Democrat now, but he was a libertarian. And he was quite surprised that in Australia we have compulsory voting. He was like, we don't like the government telling us what to do. But I wanted to sell it to him, and I'll sell it to you why I think compulsory voting is a good thing. First of all, nobody goes to jail if you don't vote. It's not like a serious thing, right? You get like a small fine. It's like $20 or $30 or something, 40. I can't remember. But and it's easy to get out of. All you do is you email someone and say, "I'm sick, I couldn't vote." Nothing happens to you. So again, there's no real big problem to not vote. But what it does create is it creates a culture from when you're born to when you're older of everybody has to vote. And what we know of is in America, there are so many people who don't follow politics compared to Australia. The reason for that is you don't have to vote. So why would you care? If you don't want to participate in voting, then you wouldn't follow politics at all because why would you? You're not voting, right? So, but in Australia, if you grow up in a culture where everyone thinks this is important, civic duty, we look at it as it's not about you're going to get a fine, whatever. We look at it as a civic duty. You got once every 3 or 4 years, you go vote. Like it's not exactly a massive thing to do. We're not asking you to join we're not asking you to join the army for 4 years, right? You go up, you sign it, and in Australia, it's way easier to vote. Like you vote 2 weeks beforehand. We have loads of voting booths. It's like 5 minutes in and out. It's done on a Saturday, not a Tuesday, right? So it's really easy. So there's no reason why you can't vote. If violating it means the consequences like a parking ticket, that sounds like a great legal requirement. Yeah. And again, it's not even again, you can like a parking ticket you can't really get out of. Not voting, you just email, say you're sick, you'll get out of it. So it's not even that bad. But what it does is if everybody in America, the parties have to fight for their base because a lot of people don't vote and there's no compulsory voting, right? So you have to fight for your base. So a lot of times they go to the extremes. So Trump, has to get the MAGA base to come out. So he has to do and say crazy shit to get them out, right? And the independents and the people who don't vote a lot, right? They get left out of the conversation because they're going to the extremes and, whatever. And then, so you have more, the middle people don't get to vote as much. And also there's a lot less people who are engaged with voting. They know a lot less about it. So in Australia, there are two main parties, right? A centre left, a centre right, but we have other parties. It's not, we don't just have two parties. there are other parties who also run, but they never get more than, say, 10% of the vote, right? They get little, but you can run as a third candidate, right? Now, those two parties, there's like independents and stuff, but there's two main minority parties. Heidi, Americans take our rights for granted. You don't know what you get once it's gone. Those who didn't vote were a huge part of why we're stuck in the mess. That's exactly right, Heidi. And the reason why MAGA exists in America and doesn't exist in a lot of other Western countries is, I believe, is that the culture, Meg, that's wild America, so proud of democracy, liberty, don't tread on me, but two-thirds of don't vote, great point, yeah. Um, this is the thing, like, there's not compulsory voting in a lot of Europe as well, but they do talk about it as a civic duty, right? It's a civic duty. In America, they don't talk about like a civic duty, right? It's like, stay out of, don't tell me what to do. It's none of your business. That's the mentality. Like, there's like a libertarian individualism, right, about America. You look at the healthcare system, right? It's more of, it's more individualistic than collective like other countries have. So a lot of that is, don't tell me what. So the government doesn't want to tell people to vote. It's a civic duty because they feel like it's encroaching on their civic, on their freedoms, right? Which is insane, because why wouldn't you want, one of the most important things that's going to affect people's lives is to encourage everybody to vote, but in Australia, I know people who don't follow politics like I do, right? But what they do is they get 2 or 3 weeks out before the election and they go, oh, I've got to vote. Now, these people wouldn't be voting if they're in America. Absolutely not, because they're not that interested. But they go that because they know it's a civic duty, they'll go, you know what? Oh, this weekend I'm going to sit down and look at both their policies online. And so they look at their policies, spend hours looking at their stuff, and then make an informed decision, right? Now, they're doing that because they've grown up in Australia, and even those people who aren't that into politics, right? They're still taking it seriously when they go to vote. And that's why we don't have those full-on extremes on other end, because we get so much of the middle that comes out to vote. And so those two parties, the minority parties we call, there's one on the far left, which is like the Greens Party, like what you have in Australia. They talk more about climate change, that sort of thing. And then we have the extreme right, which is called the National Party, which is like almost like a Trump party, right? Which is very much against immigration, all that sort of stuff. And it's run by a woman called Pauline Hanson, who can't string a sentence together. If you ever go on YouTube and Google Pauline Hanson, it's a crazy. She's been in power for 30 years. Not in power, but she's been a leader of that party. They get about 10% of the vote on each side, somewhere between 5 and 7, right? And then they can give what thing called preferences. So what in America, it's first across the line, so there's no. But what you do in Australia is if you vote Greens, you can put down number 2 as the other left-wing party, which is the Labor Party, right? So basically what happens is you put Greens Party first, and the second party that you want to win if yours doesn't win, right? Second. So you're not losing the vote. So, for example, all those people who voted Greens in Pennsylvania because they were against the war, the war in Palestine, they could have put Democrats second, and then obviously if the Greens don't win, that vote gets passed on to the Democrats. So it's not a wasted vote. So that's how a lot of the left wing parties win. Is they don't just get votes from themselves; they get votes from independents who preference them, who say, "Look, if you don't vote for us, we want you to vote for this person," right? And you can just decide to do it yourself as well. So that's how they get extra votes from each side. I don't know if you want that. That's a bit different argument, but I think getting people out to vote is a massive thing, and creating a culture where people feel engaged and also we don't have crazy politicians. We have very bland, boring politicians in Australia, which, by the way, I like, which is probably why we're so obsessed with American politics, because it's like a reality TV show. Not for you guys, it's reality. So, but for us, it's like, oh my God. But yeah, I think the reason we wouldn't get a Donald Trump here is because of the way we vote here, and our culture of voting, everyone coming out to vote. So yeah. Anyway, I've got to go, but thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed to me on my Joe Thomas newsletter, and I'll try to do some more as well. Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed it, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.